Welcome to the Quasi Show. This is Mazza.
And Mary.
And Mary, there you are. And so today's show, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be really, really interesting because we, as promised, are having a whole show to discuss on fear. So...
Yeah, what are we going to be discussing about fear, Marianne? What can we unpack in that we're going to...
Yeah, well, I've just been doing some research, as you know, Mary. It's my life force, researching.
The inquiring mind.
Yeah, and what actually with Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, where I'm a teacher and training there, I have to do all of this research around neuroscience. So it's quite interesting to see what actually happens to the brain, in the brain, and things like that. But more importantly, I think things that we can cover today is why we're so afraid, and what fear actually means, and even perhaps, Mary, how we debilitate ourselves, and some solutions, of course.
We're all about solutions.
We're all about solutions, how to overcome and break through these barriers that we create for ourselves around fear. So the first thing I'd really love to share is what fear actually, and a great analogy on fear. I think it was that lady who wrote that book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway? Was it Susan Jeffries? Or
it was Susan Jeffries.
Very good. Good, yeah. So I think she wrote the analogy that it's a false event appearing real. If you break down the words FEAR, a false event appearing real.
Event appearing real. I think you're right. She did say that, didn't she?
Yeah, I've used it quite a bit in certain things as well. But
that's where our imagination kicks in, isn't it? We imagine things before they happen, and we believe them to be real. We believe the outcome is going to be a certain way. But I'll step you back to where you were coming from, Marianne. Keep going.
Yeah. So fear is an idea or an anticipation of something. It's that gap, isn't it? It's in between the now and the actual event.
Yes, it is. It's that, I'll give you a really simple example. Obviously, when we're doing these podcasts, this is quite a new experience for me. So often I find myself hesitating because I have a little fear going on at times about how I might be heard, how my voice might be heard, and it just puts a hesitation in there. So that's a really simple and raw example of how fear can infiltrate.
Yeah, because you're the thinker, Mary. So it's all about the thinker. So we can say that fear has a sense of, fear of being out of control is an example of what most people experience as fear. I used to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder for years, so I always had this massive fear of being out of control, because what would the result be? What would the outcome mean? Even though it was an illusion in my current reality, but the old programming was still playing in my physiology. So this is what happens through my research, Mary. This is what happens to us. So we play a movie in our mind, and then it goes through certain networks of the brain and tells the body to go into flight or fright or freeze or whatever it's going to do, releasing all sorts of hormones into the body to prepare the body for a big event, like we're going to be eaten by a tiger or something, right?
Yeah, because you can feel it. You feel it immediately, don't you, when you start to
panic, and your heart races and you start sweating. You think, like for me, for years, I used to think I was going to pass out. When I was growing up, I used to faint all the time to get out of. It's the only way that my body knew how to get out of the situations that my childhood presented. So I'd pass out all through school, the whole bit. And so your body can actually shut down completely beyond freeze, and your brain just shuts down and you can pass out. So a lot of people, I don't know how many, I have never known it. I've never asked the question, do you pass out when you're incredibly fearful? But
Well,
that is,
I mean that's post-traumatic stress disorder for you. I mean, and for many people, it's extremely real, isn't it? And even that freezing, that can be as simple as, well, not as simple as, but it's debilitating as stage fright when people are up in front of an audience. That's
yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of freeze reaction.
Yeah, there's all sorts of levels of fear that overcome us at times. But here's the golden nugget. You can through neuroscience, what the research shows is you can just change your thought pattern. Therefore, the
Right.
movie, rewrite the movie, or you might, even with linguistics programming, we know we can actually change the state by asking another question, like, getting someone into a place of acceptance, and therefore change your thinking, and it will change the physiology in your body. So, for example, I might say to somebody, if you weren't afraid, what would you do? They'd go, oh, well, I'll do it. Okay. I had a client the other night. So I said, if you weren't afraid, how would you behave?
How would you behave? Yeah. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
instantly shifts you, just that thinking about that shifts you to a slightly different space, doesn't it?
Yeah. And then to follow it through with, so are you going to let this irrational fear of what someone's going to think of you rule your life?
So is it necessary in a rational fear? So I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, Marianne. If we talk about fear and it's happening for a physiological reason, so we've created a movie in our mind, and that could be as real to somebody as a table in front of you, that movie. Is that fear actually irrational, or is it protecting us in some way?
Well, it's definitely, we think it's protecting us from, humiliation or something that's been programmed in our first 7 years, because it's all coming from that programming. But here's the thing, like, isn't it interesting, Mary, that we generally, we all have more in common than less in common. So just like you, the man down the road from you worries about what other people think.
Yes.
And just like you, the lady at the shop worries, is afraid of being made a fool of, right? And all of these things that we share in this network, this complex network in our thought patterns, and yet if we had enough awareness to recognize that everyone feels like that, right? And the only way we can shift that is through understanding and, compassion, understanding, which is, understanding is love, So, so let's take a quick break. And when we come back, perhaps we can start unpacking it a bit more about why we experience these things. How does that sound?
Okay, let's do that.
Okay. Back in one moment. Welcome back.
Hey, welcome back, Marianne. And let's keep unpacking this fear.
Yeah. So all sorts of different types of fear, isn't there, Mary?
Yes, there are. So what are you afraid of, Marianne?
What am I afraid of? Well, having practice, I have a daily practice. I practice so much about, how I show up in the world and practice my inner calm and all of those things. So I meditate a lot and do things like that. So I don't have a great deal of fear anymore.
Yeah, you are quite remarkably courageous. I have to say that. I like the way you just bite things off and get on with them. I was just doing a little bit of writing before. This has just popped back into my mind. I used to tell everybody when I was doing corporate training, never be afraid to ask any question. There's no such thing as a stupid question. And it's funny, isn't it? But there are often times that I won't ask a question because I think it's stupid.
Yeah. It's all about that. I think my biggest fears I've ever had in life, which is what I understand everybody shares, is the fear of survival. that I'm not going to survive. I can't take care of myself somehow. And when I'm coaching people, especially if they've lost somebody in life, or I remember when my mum passed, my dad was so afraid, you know, just stuff I witnessed before he passed, you know, like, and a lot of people are afraid of, I was in a big tall building the other day, and this person was showing another person an apartment, and the real estate agent and the client, as I was in the lift, it was this big exposed glass lift, were both holding on and too scared to look out the window. And I'm like,
Oh, really?
I said, and they said, oh, I'm so scared of heights. I said, no, you're not. You're both scared of death. And they went,
Yeah.
no, we're not.
Yeah,
said,
I'm not afraid of heights. I'm afraid of falling.
Yes, you're afraid of falling to your death. And I said, so, you know, and I remember years ago when I overcame the fear of death through, I used to be afraid of flying when I was about, goodness me, maybe 20 years or so ago. And I was going to America a lot for a lot of training. And so I went to a hypnotist. And when I went back to my childhood, when he took me back, it was all about the fear of death. Because I was in such a heightened state in my nervous system as a child, because there was a lot of violence around me. So I was always afraid of death. And so I carried that fear through my adult life for a long time. And it used to show up in unconscious ways. I wasn't aware it was always happening. But even, you know, having worked for myself for, you know, a couple of decades, you know, and if you had a bad month, it's like, how am I going to survive, and blah, 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 blah. And so, yeah, a lot of people have that fear of survival, because guess what? Our parents generally came from that era. So
yeah, and look, and obviously we, in some part of our brain, we're all consciously or we're unconsciously aware that we're not here permanently. So survival is a real, can be a real cause of anxiety.
yeah,
Just touching on, you just touched a little bit there before about in your childhood. So we talked earlier just about the first 7 years and what happens, and so maybe we just want to touch a little bit more on that, and how fears are developed, and perhaps how resilience is developed. What do you know
yeah,
about that, Marianne,
yeah.
that we can share?
Yeah. So in the first 7 years, you know, as psychologists will tell you, that's when we're programmed, our brain is programmed, or the neural pathways of our brain set up our nervous system, and it's neuroplasticity. And so what happens is, as a child, you know, let's say we have this ebb and flow about, you know, we're curious, and we go out and we step over and we look at the puppy dog, or we look at the pussy cat, and then we seek for, you know, approval from the parent. Is this safe? Or we'll go up to the fireplace and we'll go, oh, that's hot. So we're curious little bunnies, and we're all looking to explore. But there's a part of our setup where there needs to be a safety to come back. You know, the parent might call us back. We might be in the playground. Come on, dear, come back to me. And so we understand there's this safety that we can go a certain distance, but we can come home to safety. And it sets up a healthy nervous system in the body. So we know that we can, as adults, then go into work, and then we come home to safety, and we have this almost unconscious relevance to how far I can go. You know, a lot of people, once they get on a plane and travel, start to have panic attacks because they're out of their comfort zone. You know. But when you didn't grow up in a safety zone, and
that's what I was going to say. Not everybody has that kind of
and
support.
you know, a lot of people had a tremendous amount of fearful parents, you know, because we came from the survival era. So our messaging, you know, if anyone's in the sort of 40s, 50s, 60s and so on, our messaging as children, and still repeated today, of course, those beliefs that get indoctrinated into us is like, you know, careful, look out, you know, you sure you know what you're doing, and all of this stuff. And of course the child,
that reminds me, a few times I've heard that in my childhood. Yeah.
So the child is like, hey, I'm just exploring, and now you're freaking me out that I'm going to be in danger. So the more that happens, the more that the child's nervous system will be heightened. And so it can be a good thing and a not so good thing. What it did for me is, for example, I have incredibly high resilience because, pretty much a couple of gunshots have to go on for me to, freak out because, I've seen a lot and experienced a lot. So my nervous system is accustomed to that expansion of what fear looks like. And so even though it works in high sensory perception, where I'll go into a situation and I can scan the room in 30 seconds and see if there's a threat or danger. Yeah. And then I'm all good. I've sussed it out completely and I know that no one's here is a threat. Whereas somebody who came into that real safety environment where they felt safe as a child, then they go out to the world and they can often not see what it actually is a threat. So I was really quite, in hindsight, to try and find the silver lining. I can see the blessings out of being brought up in that because, yeah,
you've become highly perceptive of threats but what if you haven't grown up with that background of a learning environment or a safe learning environment where you can go out and explore the world and come back and so you've how do you create that as an adult? What do you do?
Yeah. So like I had to, I just kept doing the internal work and clearing out, what didn't serve me and I did years of belief management and understanding what I thought, how I thought. I was always incredibly passionate about the science of the mind, hence why I now teach it. So it's really your life purpose, really, isn't it? So what you need to learn, you end up being the teacher of in some way, I think. But what the good news is that how our brain operates is we can actually build new pathways in the brain and strengthen our own resilience. And I've gone from highly anxious, passing out, up until I was in my early 30s, right into absolutely cool with it, so that just takes a daily practice. And I've done all sorts of different modalities, but it's about doing that work, and you can reprogram yourself, no problem at all. Absolutely no problem. That's the beautiful thing about our brain.
Okay, so where do people go to find out? Maybe we can take a little break now and we can come back and talk about where people go to or what they need to do, some of the things that you might have done yourself to create those neurons and increase that plasticity in your brain.
Yeah, and overcome fear. Yeah, I'll be back in one moment. Welcome back.
Hey, welcome back, Marianne. We covered off a lot of things right there, so I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about, or maybe you can provide a couple of questions to our audience about how they start addressing fear and what are some tips?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, self-awareness, as you know, Mary, is the key to every part of our personal growth, and to have that self-inquiry. I remember even when I used to suffer severe anxiety in my teens and 20s, and even I remember having a massive panic attack in my 30s when I first started my own business. And that was, I think the best thing was to constantly ask myself the questions around, why am I feeling this right now? What is going on for me? Who does this actually belong to?
Yeah, who does this belong to?
And it's like, is this my mother's fear? Is this my father's fear? Who does this belong to? Because often science has even proven now that when we're in the womb, we can feel, taste, smell, all these things, what our mother is experiencing.
Wow. And do you know, when you ask that question, even when I do it right now, who does it belong to? Who does this fear belong to? You can often hear people's voices echoing in the background. People
Yeah.
like saying to you, oh, be careful, like you were
Yeah.
mentioning before.
Yeah. And also you can energetically feel when you say, who does it belong to? I remember Access Consciousness did a thing around it, and you can actually energetically feel yourself go lighter. So if it's not yours, who does
Oh,
it
yeah.
belong to? You can actually feel it go lighter. If it is yours, and let's say you're in your career and you're not quite sure what to do, or you want to leave, or you want to do your own business, or a lot of survival fears come up around people that want to get out on their own and start a new project or a new stage in their life.
Yeah.
So it's really, really good to write all your fears down. On the left-hand side of the page, fear of failure, fear of won't be able to make it, fear of this, fear of that. And then on the other side of the page, write the opposite. And then ask yourself, well, who do I want to be? And what can I do to get to the right-hand side of the page? So clearly I need some coaching, I need some counseling, I need coping mechanisms in order to preferably not a pill, but there is, I remember when I used to do a lot of public speaking, and a lot of musicians, they all take beta blockers, and it just it's not for the brain, it's for below the neck. It just calms your nervous system. And and there's no there's no physical, there's no response like that. You don't feel calm, you just don't get the shakes. So there's all sorts of if public speaking is probably one of the scariest, but for me, public speaking is actually one of the easiest. I love public speaking, because if you look at someone who had a fear of being out of control, public speaking, I'm actually in control.
Yep.
Interesting, eh? And so what are you doing, Mary?
My cat just jumped on my knee, Marianne.
Oh, okay. I thought something happened.
Like a little claw in my leg. That's certainly, I don't have a fear of cats, so that's pretty good.
Okay.
But that could create a fear, couldn't it? Cat sneaking up from behind and jumping.
People have a fear of all sorts of animals, right? And yet here's the interesting thing. People have a fear of all sorts of things, yet there's no actual rational reason why in some cases, right? So you can have people that have a fear of drowning, or a fear of water, or a fear of this, or a fear of that. And we know that, if it's a repetitive thing, it's a phobia of sorts. And there's all sorts of things you can do. You can find an NLP practitioner, which I'm one. You can go and get, all sorts of things done. It's just incredible, the modalities that are available today to overcome fears.
Right at the beginning of the podcast, you talked about, the movie idea, the analogy of a movie, and how that we're projecting on in front of us what the outcome might be, and that's creating a fear. So a simple technique might also be rewriting that movie in real time, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Albert Einstein has always used around the imagination, it's a tool in order for us to rescript, rewrite, reframe. And so imagine, and this is how psychologists train great sports people. So they visualize the outcome, they imagine it, it changes the whole physiology in the body from rewriting the movie. So seeing them win, seeing them go across the line, seeing them, javelin or high jump, seeing them reach that peak. And as the body attempts to pace it out, the body is already prepared in knowing exactly what it has to do to achieve that result. And so that's why we know, and science has proven, that we can rewire, reframe, redo anything. But we have to go exploring, Mary. And when people don't explore and get to know themselves from the inside out, is when fear exaggerates itself and debilitates people's lives.
Yes, getting to know yourself from the inside out. All right. Well, there's a
Yes.
few things to for everybody to have a little go at and reduce and remove fear in their life.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. So as far as other fears, such as fear of being alone, a lot of people actually create behavior and take actions that they wouldn't necessarily do if they didn't have some sort of fear like that, right?
Yeah.
They stay in marriages,
Yeah.
they stay in toxic situations, they go out and be with somebody because they just need, to be a part of that, or society, as they know it, can create a tremendous amount of fear for people.
Yes, and we did talk about loneliness and what an epidemic that is in one of our earlier podcasts.
Yeah. And so yeah, it's interesting how fear can actually then change your decision-making process. So that's why always the absolute key question is, if I wasn't afraid, how would I behave, or how would I act? What would I do if I wasn't afraid? What decision would I make for myself right now?
Yeah, and that just gave me a little thought too, as if people are struggling or suffering in life, or and not feeling brave enough, they are afraid to reach out to somebody, that can result in quite heavy consequences. So for those of us who aren't afraid, maybe it's good to ask other people how are they doing. It's not necessarily always leave it to the person that if you suspect someone is silently in fear or experiencing a rough time, then don't be afraid to reach out to them.
Yeah, and to understand too, we're all afraid of something. We all have fears. It's a part of the human condition.
Yeah, as you said, we've got more in common than we have less in common.
Exactly. And so people who are well practiced and continue to do the work will always have relief, because they're always having those breakthroughs, those aha moments. And like you said, when you saw that lady in palliative care, she said that the one inquiry that people ask in the last 3 weeks of their life is, I wish I'd had more courage, why didn't I have more courage to love, or why didn't I have more courage to, tell people I loved them, or, all of these things. So let's take a quick break, Mary, and
let's take a quick break.
When we get back, see if we can come up with some more solutions, eh?
Great.
Okay. Hi, welcome back.
Hello, welcome back.
I was going to say 1, 2, 3 when I pushed record. Isn't that interesting, Mary? But anyway, here we are.
Okay, here we are. So just in the break then, Marianne, we were doing a quick brainstorm on how we could be really helpful to our audience. And you came up with a great little gem. I love it.
Yeah, just say yes. And
just
so we're programmed to say no before we say yes, as in, self-doubt comes up, fear comes up. I don't know.
Amazing how quickly that self-doubt can pop right into your head, isn't it? You just go, oh no.
Yeah. And so we generally we've got all these threats out there called life. But imagine if you just said yes. And what would it look like if I said yes to myself, not to anyone else, just to myself? What would it look like if I said yes to myself, yes to life, yes to exploring, yes? What would it look like? Because, as you said in palliative, when you spoke to that lady that you saw at that networking event, the one question people always have is, I wish I had more courage before they're going to pass away, in the last 3 weeks. What was that about, Mary?
Look, I tell you, I've got a better one than that. Just that's popped into my little world just lately. I've just watched. Do you watch television, Marianne? I know you don't,
No.
but I do. I watch Grey's Anatomy, and anybody that's watched that, Dr. Miranda Bailey had a great question, and that suggested at the end of our days that we actually might ask ourselves, did we spend our time with the people we love, doing what we love? And a great answer to that would be yes, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
How phenomenal would that be if we could say yes to that?
Yeah. And so one of the biggest barriers in our life, which is clearly the cause of loneliness, anxiety, all sorts of things, is the fear to love, and fear of what people will think if you loved that person, or fear of, it's incredible, isn't it? And so, and what I was going to mention about that lady that you met, how she said in palliative care, the last 3 weeks of people's life, they have all this inquiry, and it's generally around, did they have the courage to love enough? I wish they had the courage to love enough. And so I'd love to end on that note about having the courage to love.
Because saying yes to love.
Saying yes to yourself,
It's been a enlightening podcast, Marianne. I hope other people find it enlightening and helpful. Because,
I'm buzzing a little bit. It's like, say yes to love, but just say yes to yourself, and
say yes to yourself.
Recognize fear is a false event appearing real, and if you have what you call real fears, then get them addressed. If they're blocking you, debilitating you, making you miserable, keeping you trapped, life's not supposed to be about that. Say yes to your life. Yeah.
That's beautiful, Marianne. I think that's a great place to finish up.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining me again today, Mary. I love hosting with you.
It's been my pleasure, and I'm always going to say yes to you, Marianne.
Okay. Cool. Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.